knows a lot about the science stuff. Professor Dave explains.
Over several tutorials, we have discussed different fingerprint patterns and their individual characteristics. Now let's find out how fingerprints are deposited on a surface. To avoid confusion between actual fingerprints on your hand and the ones deposited on a surface, we shall use the term finger marks for the latter. Finger marks are formed as a result of the interaction between the surface and the fingerprint. Broadly, we can classify the finger marks into three types. 1. Plastic prints. These are three-dimensional finger marks formed when a finger is pressed against a soft surface, such as clay, wax, wet paint, wet soap, etc. 2. Patent prints. These are two-dimensional finger marks that form when fingers that are carrying a particular material, such as wet paint, blood, or ink, are pressed against a surface. Such finger marks are readily visible on many surfaces. 3. Latent prints. These are also two-dimensional finger marks, but they are not easily visible to the naked eye. Just turn off your smartphone screen for a while. At first glance, you might not be able to see anything. However, you will be able to visualize the finger marks on your screen when you tilt it at some angle. How are these finger marks formed? Can you recall which principle of forensic science is at play here? It is Locard's law of exchange, which says that every contact leaves a trace. According to this law, these finger marks are a result of the mutual exchange of material between your fingerprints and the screen. A detailed study of all these interactions is important to determine the probability of finding finger marks at the crime scene. Latent finger marks are not readily visible. However, they can be successfully recovered from almost any surface, only if the right technique is applied. The nature of different surfaces will influence the techniques used to locate finger marks. The surface of a doorknob is one of the most plausible places to find a finger mark at the CS, but finger marks on it might not be visible to the naked eye. So, should the surface just be ignored during evidence collection? If this is done, valuable evidence present at the CS will be contaminated. The presence of finger marks can almost certainly establish the presence of a party at the CS. If the investigators fail in locating them, it can heavily influence the case at trial. This is why the knowledge of these interactions is of utmost importance. Let us discuss them in detail. The process of deposition of any finger mark generally involves three stages. 1. Application of the finger on a surface. Here, positive pressure is applied by the finger to the surface, due to which both of them get deformed to some extent. 2. Transfer of material. In this stage, the finger and the surface are in contact with each other. Material gets exchanged between the finger and the surface. The extent of transfer will depend on different factors, such as the nature of the surface, the constituents present on the surface and the applied finger, duration of time for which the finger was applied, and so forth. 3. Removal of the finger from the surface. With this stage, the process of transfer gets completed. Both the finger and the surface get relaxed to their original state. The result of this process is not only the formation of finger marks on the surface, but also constituents from the surface getting picked up by the fingers. Based on these interactions, finger marks can be classified into positive and negative impressions. Positive impressions are formed when the residue carried by the ridges of the finger gets deposited on a surface. Therefore, the lines of the resultant finger mark correspond to the actual ridges of the fingerprint, and the empty spaces between the lines resemble the furrows of the fingerprint. The visibility of positive finger marks will depend on the nature of fingerprint residue, the color and reflexivity of the surface, lighting conditions, and more. If the finger mark is easily visible, it is a patent print. If the finger mark is not visible without additional treatments, it is classified as a latent print. A patent print, like a blood-stained finger mark, can be easily recognized and recovered during the investigation. Nonetheless, it is not always the case that an investigator will find abundant patent prints on a crime scene. On the other hand, latent prints can be collected from any type of surface if the correct technique is adopted. Just because they are invisible does not mean they are not present. Going back to the finger marks on your smartphone screen, now that we have established that they are latent marks, do you wonder what residue might be present in them? Let's discuss what the friction ridge residue is made of. A major proportion of finger marks consist of sweat. The sweat glands present on our palms, the eccrine glands, secrete sweat which is made up of different constituents, such as urea, creatinine, amino acids, different proteins, and so forth. Another type of sweat gland is the apocrine gland, situated in our armpits and genital areas. Sometimes our fingerprints seem oily or greasy. This is due to the presence of sebum in the residue, which are fatty acids secreted by the sebaceous glands located in our face and hair follicles. We tend to touch different body parts arbitrarily. We scratch our heads and touch our faces very often, which deposits oil and sweat on the fingerprints. Therefore, though apocrine sweat and sebum are not directly secreted by the palmar region, they are largely present in our fingerprints as a result of this constant transfer. Similarly, other external contaminants become a part of fingerprint residue, resulting from our interactions with our environment. Sometimes contaminants present in the finger mark, such as residue from nicotine, cosmetics, dust, grease, and foodstuffs, can also point towards the lifestyle of the person. So now, when you look at your fingerprint impressions on the smartphone screen, think of all these residues that make them. An awareness regarding the constituents present in the fingerprints will help us determine their affinity towards a particular surface. This relative affinity will decide the further protocol of recovery. For example, fingerprints having greater moisture content would be easily recovered from a non-porous surface, such as a surface made of plastic or rubber. But the same approach wouldn't be applicable for a porous surface, such as paper. In the upcoming tutorials, we'll be studying different methods of fingerprint detection and enhancement according to the nature of the residue present in it. With positive finger marks covered, let's not forget about negative marks. Negative marks are formed when the ridges carry residue from the surface, as opposed to the positive marks in which ridges deposit residue. Go to any place in your room that has gathered dust over time, like a bookshelf. Touch the dusty area and observe the resultant pattern under oblique lighting. Because the ridges have picked up the dust, the lines on the finger mark will correspond to the furrows of the fingerprint, whereas the blank spaces between them will correspond to the ridges. Negative impressions are not generally found on the crime scene because of their extremely fragile nature. A gust of wind or deposition of more dust will eventually contaminate the finger mark in the dust. Coming to the last category of fingerprint impressions, plastic prints. These are a result of fingers pressing into a soft surface and permanently deforming it. Being a three-dimensional impression, the quality of this print is primarily dependent on the texture of the surface, pressure applied by the finger, and the presence of other contaminants. They are not frequently found on a crime scene when compared to latent and patent prints. With that, we now understand the dynamics behind fingerprint deposition. With all the fundamentals of fingerprint science covered, we will now discuss how fingerprints are collected from the individuals involved with the crime scene, be they suspects, victims, or witnesses.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on Patreon so I can keep making content. And as always, feel free to email me, ProfessorDaveExplains@gmail.com.